Have you ever wondered how some of the most popular Tycoon maps make these kind of harvesting systems? If so, this video is for you. We're going to go over how to do just that. As always, the code and any assets that are used within this video will be available for free in the Patreon as well as the Discord link down below. Let's get right into it. Alright, so starting out in a pretty well fresh project, the first thing we're going to want to create is our progress bar material, because I think that's probably the easiest thing to start with. So go ahead and start by creating a new folder, name it something like materials or anything you're going to remember for that matter. Open it up, right click, go material, name it something again you'll remember. We're going to call it mm_progress bar. And then go ahead and open that. In your material, since this is going to lie on our user interface, we're going to go to our domain here and switch it to be a user interface material, and also set the blend mode to be translucent, because we're going to want to be able to control the opacity of our progress bar, which you'll see why later. All right, so starting out, we're going to want a texture coordinate node, and then we're going to pipe that into a mask or a component mask, and then we're going to filter for the R channel. And then we're going to throw that into a step node. And then into that step node, we're going to hold down S and left click to create a scalar perimeter. Name that something like progress. Name that something like progress. And then pipe that into your step. And then if you preview that, you should see nothing because we have nothing here. Set it to something like 0.5, and you see this is our progress meter. So now as you change this value between anything between 0 and 1, it will fill it out accordingly. Next thing you want to do is multiply that by another scalar parameter. So just hold S to place another one down and name this one opacity. And then just pipe that into the multiplier and set it to be 1 by default. And then put this into your opacity. And that's pretty much it for controlling the actual progress bar, but we're going to want some color as well. So just hold down 3 to place a color node. Let's convert it to a parameter and name it something like color. And then just pipe that into the final color and give it some default color like red. And then again, you can see by changing your progress, it will fill it out. All right, then we're going to want to make some instances of this. So since we don't want to just use our base class, we're going to right click it, create material instance, and then you're going to name it. So we're going to have one for the foreground. And we're just going to leave that one as is. We don't really need to change any settings. You can change the color if you'd like, but I think red is a fine color. And then you can just duplicate that by selecting it and then doing Control D. And you're going to name this other one the delta. And then you're going to open that one up. You're going to want to change a couple parameters in here. So I suggest going with white for your color. So you can just pick a nice white color and then set your opacity to be not quite 1. So something like 0.5 should be fine. This is a little pink. Let's go full white here, 111. Save that, and that is it for these progress bars. So close out all of these. All right, now that you got your progress bars, let's go back to our root. We're going to want to create our widgets now. So just go ahead, another new folder, name it something intuitive. Widgets is a great option. Open that up, right click, go to user interface, widget blueprints, user widget. We're gonna start with the health bar. So let's call this w_health_bar. And just go ahead and open that up. Okay, then inside your health bar widget that you just created, you're going to go ahead and place down a canvas panel. And then in that canvas panel, we're going to throw down a stack box. So this stack box is going to be what holds our health bar as well as some text to, name it. So go ahead and select your stack box to start and set it to size to content. And then select your anchors here and hold Control Shift and then click the top center. That'll align it and set it to be stuck to the top middle of the screen. And then give it some position changes as well, just so it's not glued to the top there. I'd say like 25 to get them out. Then to start, we're going to want a text block. So this is going to be kind of the name of our actual health bar that's going to be showing on the screen. So it'll say something like whatever you want, technically, but we're going to say something like level 1 rock or whatever prop it is that we're going to be using to represent our harvestables. So you can change some settings on this to make it look however you want, really. I like giving it a little bit of outline, just so it pops a little bit, despite regardless of what background it's on. Okay, so after you have your name in there, you're gonna go and select your stack box and change its orientation to be vertical, since we want our health bar to appear below the name. Then drag out an overlay, throw that into your stack box. In that stack box, you're gonna want to throw a image. And we're going to rename stuff as we go here, just so we can keep track of what these actually are. So if you hit F2, you can rename it, and we're going to call it something like background, since that's what it'll be. Set the color to be black, and if you'd like, you can make it low opacity. I typically do something like 50, maybe 75%, 0.75. And we're going to set this to be a rounded box drawing instead of just a square. Set the radius to be whatever radius you really like. I think 10 is an appropriate amount. And you'll see that it's actually fully round here, so we have to scroll down a bit further, change the rounding type to be a fixed radius instead of the full that it was doing before. And this is a little small for a progress bar, so let's give it some width. I'd say like 800 by 50 is a pretty good amount. And you'll see that our name is now going off to the left here, so you can just select that and then go into your alignments and just hit center, and it'll stick to the middle now. Okay, so that is our background, and then on top of that, we're going to throw another image. And we're just going to have this fill, and then we're going to give it a little padding to make it not quite fill up the entire thing. And then we're going to scroll down. We're going to also make this a rounded box. And since we have 4 padding and the outside is 10, we're going to want to make this thing's rounding 6. Just the difference, just so the rounding looks good and proper when you look at it closely. You can see it rounds quite nicely. And in this one, we are going to be putting our delta material. So if you open up your drawer and go to your materials and throw your delta material onto the brush here. And we're going to rename this as well, just to be delta, just so we can remember what it is and what it's doing. So this is going to be the meter that kind of animates, I guess you could say, as you hit things, just so you can see the difference in damage being dealt as you swing at a harvestable. All right, to make the next one, we're just going to duplicate this. So Control D on while selecting your delta, it'll make another one, and rename this to be foreground. And we're going to change this material to be our foreground material. So you can just drag that in there as well. And then the last thing for actual widgets that we're going to throw in here is another text block. So I'm just going to copy this one and then select the overlay and just paste it in there. And this one's going to show your actual health digits, so you can see how much actual health is left on the harvestable. So let's just throw a placeholder in here just so you can see what it's going to kind of look like. I think some spacing maybe, and that looks decent. Shrink it down a little bit just so it doesn't take up so much. And yeah, there you go. So this is what the actual widget's going to look like on your screen. And now we need to do some bindings. So we need a good few of these. This one actually has quite a lot. We're just going to pump them all out and we will explain them as we go, and you'll see where they get used later on. So to start, we're going to create a new verse variable up in the top right here. We're going to name it name or title, something like that. Just something you remember that we're going to be naming this thing, and set it to be a type message. Next up, we're going to want a float value to track how full the progress bar is going to be. So we're just going to call that damage progress and change that type to be float. And just check that off. Next up, we're going to want some stuff for our animation that we're going to be playing. So first, we're going to want a play damage anim. And this is going to be a float, and this is what we're going to use as a flag to play the animation once we have that in the code. And then we're going to want another float here, and it's going to be animation speed. This is going to control how fast the animation plays. So we need another one, of course. So this one is going to be damage progress message. So this is what's going to appear on this 123/456 kind of health bar or health progress text. Since our progress that we're using up in the damage progress is a float, we can't really use that as we want. And just make that a message type and then check that off. Okay, next up we want some more animation stuff. So the first one is a anim start time. You'll see why this is used in a second here, just the way we're using an animation to play our delta animation. Making use of the start and stop times is a pretty good way to do this and make it look smooth with doing a minimal amount of work in the actual code later. And then we also need an anim end time, and just set that to be a float as well. And then finally we'll need one last flag, which is cancel animation, and that will also be a float. And just check that. All right, that is all of our variables, quite a few. Let's go through and bind them all. So first, start off by selecting your name, go to the text content, and click this little chain icon, and then select your title. There you go, that one's done. Next, go to your 123/456. Again, with the text content, just chain it up, bind it to our damage progress message. So now we want to go click on our foreground here, and just go ahead and select in your view bindings, just add widget foreground, and then it'll appear down here. So you can go and select on your first drop down or whatever it is, and go brush, select Second drop down, go to conversion functions, set scalar parameter on your brush. So this is going to control the progress scalar parameter that we set in our material. So that'll make the red bar move as you damage the harvestable. And we named it progress. So let's fill that in as the parameter name. And then we will bind our value to be the damage progress value that we set up a second ago. Next, we're going to add a condition. This is going to control all of our animation stuff. So first, just select your left drop down and go and find your cancel animation. Just like that, just select. And then when it's equal to 1, so that we're going to set the flag to 1 to stop our animation. And then select on your health bar here, and you're going to go Q stop all animations. That way we don't have to pick which one. It'll just kill any animations that are playing. And then we're going to run another condition. So just again hit add condition. You're going to go find your play damage anim and just select that. And then when that's equal to 1, you're going to go ahead and Q play animation. I think it's this last one here. I don't know why it's not wide enough for me to read it. Play animation time range, that's what you want, select. So this will be a little more controllable, so that's why we have this start and end time. So you'll see that in a second when we make the animation. So you can bind our animation, which we'll create in a minute here, and we'll come back to. So first you can bind the start time to be your anim start time, and then likewise for the end time, just your anim end time. Number of loops to play is 1, that's fine. Playback mode is forward, that's fine. Playback speed, so you can set that as well to your animation speed that we created earlier, and just like that. All right, so let's create our animation next. So just click on your animation tab down here, dock it in your layout so it'll stay there, create a new animation. Let's just call this damage animation. Select it, and then we're gonna wanna add, what do we wanna add? Our delta, that's an important part. So you can go ahead and add delta. While it's selected, it'll let you select it from this little add drop down. And then in your delta, you're gonna wanna go to your brush, open up the brush, and you're gonna add your progress. So this animation, let's hide our foreground just so we can see this animation working. So you wanna start by having it at 1 to start, and then at the end of your animation, which we don't really want to be 5 seconds, that's a little long. We want it to be exactly 1 second, so then we can control the speed to control the duration a little easier in verse later. So at 1, we're going to set this to be 0. So then if you look at this animation, you can see the delta going up and down. How perfect is that? But not quite. So open up your little sequence curve. You can do that by just selecting that squiggle icon, and then right click on this first node and change it to be linear. And then likewise for the second node here, just right click and go linear. Because if we don't have it linear, then the start and stop times aren't going to map properly to the values that we're trying to achieve. So now it perfectly goes from 0 to 1 over 1 second. And that is pretty much the entire animation. So that's good. Just go ahead and save that. Go back to your bindings. So now you can go back to your view bindings and go into your animation here, click the chain, open up the drop down, select your menu here, and find your damage animation and just select it. And there you go. That is all of the widget stuff for the health bar. So let's go ahead and save, compile, and we can leave that for now. The next thing we're going to do is create our pop-up widget as well. So we're going to need another one, another widget blueprint. You can do that by just right-clicking, user interface, widget blueprint, user widget, w underscore, we're going to call this pop-up, sure, that's fine. And then open that up. All right, once you're in here, what we're going to want to do is throw down a canvas panel, and in that canvas panel we're going to throw down an overlay, and this overlay we're going to want to open up our anchors, control shift center, that'll center it up, and size the content to be true. And we want this to be somewhat offset, so let's give it like 100 pixels on the x coordinate, that'll move it to the right. And then in this overlay, the first thing we want is an image. So this image is going to really just act as a kind of size for the content to fit in, just so it doesn't, have weird formatting issues. I'm not sure if this is really necessary. I just found it to be an easier way to do it. So it to be like 150 or something. It's a good amount. And we might actually want to move our overlay a bit. Set this to be 150. Perfect. Go back to your image. Set the opacity to 0 because we don't actually want to see it. And then in there, we're going to throw a stack box into the overlay. And we're going to throw a image as well as a text block. So this text block doesn't really matter what it says because it's going to get changed. We're just going to say 1.23k, 1.23k, just so you can see what the text is actually going to look like. And we're also going to want a texture. So let's make a folder, textures, and throw in the texture that is linked in the Patreon. You select on your image, just drag it out. That's a little big, so we're going to change it to be something like 50 by 50. And then set our text to be center just to line up with that a little better. And we're going to change the text color to be something more similar to the brick. So you can just open up the color, use the dropper, and pick a shade of the brick that you like. And also give it an outline just so it'll be a little more visible on other backgrounds. So we're going to just do 2 pixels. That's a fine amount. And I'd say give it a little left padding just so it's not completely stuck to the brick, and that's pretty good. One thing I also want to do is maybe extend our container a little bit, maybe like 175. Then the next thing I want to do is maybe name some stuff here. So this is going to be our accumulator. Doesn't really matter what you name it, just for differentiation's sake. And we're going to want to just duplicate that, rename this one to be our delta. And we're going to go down into our transform here. And we're going to just move it up. So this is going to be the one that kind of like pops up off of it when you hit something to show how much you gained. So I think like -50 is a good amount. Let's set up some variables. First one we're going to want is a currency delta, and this is going to be a message. We're also going to want a currency running total, and that's going to be a message as well. So the delta is going to show how much we just gained on our last hit, and then the running total is going to show us how much we've gained since the first hit in this kind of chain of hits that we're performing at the moment. Then of course we're going to want some flags for setting our animation. So we're going to go play collection anim, and we're going to set that to be a float. And we're also going to want a cancel anim flag as well, and just set that to be a float as well. So let's bind the easy ones quick. So this is our delta, so select that, go to content text, and then just bind your currency delta message that you set. And then do the same for your other one here. You're probably gonna have to click it in your hierarchy since this is technically overlapping it. So just select the text block, go content, and then the currency running total, and select. All right, so that's those parts done. So one important thing is to actually hide these. So first you want to go into your delta and then set the render opacity to be 0, because we're going to be controlling all these through the animations. So it's important that they are hidden, so then we can only show them when the animation is playing. That way we don't have to deal with hiding and showing the widgets. So then after your delta is set to opacity 0, we're also going to set the top level overlay to be opacity of 0. And you're not going to be able to see anything, and of course that makes sense. So in our animation now that we'll create, it'll reveal the widgets as they should be. Let's create an animation, a collection anim, something like that. So the first thing we're going to add is our overlay. So just select that in your hierarchy, go add overlay, and then in our overlay we're going to go here, render opacity. All right, so we're going to need to make this I'd say 2 seconds is a good amount of time for this animation to play and show on the screen after hitting something. It gives you room to hit another thing for it to accumulate, but it's also not on your screen so long that it's annoying when you stop hitting something. So 2 seconds is good. And I'd say by the maybe 0.25 second mark, we can have our opacity at 1. So it'll start by kind of, maybe that's a little long. Let's drag it to 0.1 seconds. So it'll fade in really quick when you hit something. And then towards the end here, I'd say let's fade out over 0.1 seconds again. So just throw another keyframe down and then go to the 2 second mark and set it to be 0. All right, so as you can see, it will pop up and then it'll go away. Okay, so that's just the fade in. Let's add the actual kind of bump animation that we get. So to add a transform track, drag it out to the duration of the animation. Okay, let's actually get rid of this fade in. Let's delete the 0 and just drag the 1 to the start. So it will immediately show on the screen when the animation starts. And this will give us room to show our bump animation instead. So go to the 0.1 second mark, set your scale to be something like 1.2, something very obvious. And then go to your 0.25 second mark, set it back down to 1. If you don't like the speeds of it, you can of course move things around to your liking. I think the quicker the better. We might even move these down to 0.5 and 0.15 or something. And we're also going to move it up a little bit just for added effect, like negative 10 pixels, and then back down to 0. Then when you hit something, it'll play this. Let's get rid of our visuals here so you can see. Every time you hit something, it'll do this like bump. All right, so that's pretty much it for the accumulator. So the next thing we want to do is add our delta. So you just select it in your hierarchy, go and add delta. And we want it to show pretty much right when the animation starts. So just go render opacity and it'll immediately be 1, which is good. And then drag out this track to be the duration here. And we kind of want this to fade as it moves up. And we want it to move up pretty quick because we want it to disappear before they hit again. So I think 0.5 seconds is a good amount of time. So just set it to 0 at the 0.5 second mark. So there you go. You see when you hit, it'll appear and it'll fade away. And we also want it to move up. So we can do that by adding a transform track. Open up your transform, go to your translation. Make sure you have a keyframe, and then go to your 0.5 and just move it up to your desired amount. All right, so as you can see, it'll move up a pretty good amount. All right, go ahead, save, compile. And we're gonna wanna throw in some binding here to actually play and stop this animation. So go add condition on your left dropdown, your pop-up. Find your play collection animation, select that, and set the is equal to be 1. So when it's equal to 1, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go queue play an animation. And we're going to bind the animation we just created, which is our collection anim, and just select that. And we're going to want a second condition. So just go add another condition and bind this to our cancel anim flag and set that to 1. And then again, go in here, stop all animations. So that's just going to kill any animations that are playing. And that's pretty much it on the widget side. So let's head over into Verse and write some code. Of course, before we can write any code, we're going to need some files to write them in. So you can go to Verse Explorer, and then just right click on your project, add a new Verse file. We're going to need 2 here. So we're going to need a HUD manager device. Create that. And we're also going to want a Harvestable manager device. So this one's going to control the Harvestables, and the HUD is going to control the UI on your screen. Once those are created, go ahead and open up your first project. It's full screen, and I think we're going to start with our Harvestable because that is a little more important, just so we can actually hit something and see what's going on. So you can start by just deleting all this boilerplate and just blocking out your own begin so that it doesn't complain. So the first thing we're going to do is create a Harvestable class to hold our Harvestable information, stuff like the prop as well as the prop manipulator, its health, functions for taking damage, playing animations, all that kind of stuff. So our Harvestable class is going to be a concrete class. And it's going to have a couple fields that are going to be editable, so we're going to need to set them up in UEFN afterwards. So that will be our prop, which is a type creative prop, and that will hold our actual object that you're going to be hitting. And then you'll need a prop manipulator as well. This will be responsible for registering your damage events to your prop when you hit it. And we're going to need a couple other fields as well. So when you break this, we're not going to actually be destroying the prop. I think it's a little easier to just hide it instead of, deleting it from the world and having to deal with respawning it and having to have all that state management of managing the props instance in the existence of the world. So we're just going to have a transform here. So this is going to be where the prop initially spawns. And we're going to use this to act as our base position. So when we hide it, we can then move it back to this afterwards to make sure it becomes visible again. Okay, another thing we're going to want is all of the information about the Harvestable. So we're not going to set these up on a per Harvestable basis. We're going to set them up in kind of a container-like fashion. So you'll have a bunch of these Harvestables that are of the same kind of instance almost, and just so that they all share this data, so we don't have to do as much data definition in UEFN. We can do as little as possible, as I would hope. So something we'll need is a title, which is just going to be an empty string for now. We're also going to want a max health, which can just be 0 for now. We're going to want a health, which is going to be our current health, also 0. We're also going to want a respawn time, which is also just going to be 0 for now. So to set these values, we're going to need to pass them in somehow. So we'll also need a way to kind of set these values, as I mentioned before, with the kind of container that we're going to go with. So let's do that now, because I think that's a good part to have. So let's just name it something like Harvestable Container. It's a class of a creative device, and it's going to have a couple fields. So it's going to have all of the fields related to that we just created up here pretty much. So we can just paste all these in here. We don't want all of these. I think max health is not quite appropriate. We'll just have health, and just make it editable for all of these. They do not need to be variables, so we can so we have those fields that are going to define the information about the Harvestables that are stored inside of this container. And then of course we also need our Harvestables. So we can just make harvestables, which is an array of harvestable, and that's just going to be an empty array for now. And yeah, that's our container. So now this container has all the data definition for our actual harvestable. So we're going to need to pass that in when we initialize our harvestable here. So we can have an init function inside of our harvestable. And in this init function, we're going to want to pass in our data that we want to store. So that'll just be in the form of this container. So, right, so we have our container here. Really, all we want to do now is just set the title, go to the container's title. So we want to just go through and set all of our fields here to be the ones from our container. So that's the title, the health. We're going to just set the health equal to max health just to make sure that transfers properly, which of course it will. We also want to set our respawn time. There you go. So that's all that kind of basic data definition just out of the way. The thing we'll want to do is actually set up our initial transform. So we're just going to go prop. We're going to set the initial transform equal to prop.getTransform. So there we go. We have our initial position and rotation and such of the prop so that after we damage it and hide it, we can put it back to how it originally was. So we also want to handle the events of our prop getting hit and stuff. So we'll create an onDamage function, and it's going to take in an agent, and it's going to return nothing. We're going to subscribe to this onDamage function with our prop manipulator. So we're going to go prop manipulator dot damaged event dot subscribe onDamaged, and this will just fire every time the prop gets hit, which we will set up later in the world. So onDamaged, there's a couple things we want to do. We don't want to handle too much logic in here, so we want to really just cast the agent to a player, so we can use that in our next step. And something we actually want to do before that is make sure our health is above 0. So checking if our health is above 0 is just a safety net. So we don't want to try and damage it if it's already broken, just so we don't accidentally replay an animation while it's not supposed to, stuff like that. Just a little safety net. And we're going to want a damage function. So let's create that. And it's going to take in a player, so who damaged it, and then how much damage is being dealt, which is going to be a float. And it'll return nothing, and it will block for now. And so what we're going to do is just call that. So this is going to be where you set up how much damage the player is doing. We're just going to set it to be 1.0 just for example's sake. You could do something like fetching from, I don't know, if you have a cache or if you have your player data storing how much damage they deal, you'd peel that from there and throw that in place of this 1. So before we can move on to our damage function, there's going to be a few different things we're going to need to consider. So for our progress bar to work, we need some information, and we're going to store that all in a kind of class that we're going to use, and we're just going to pass that to our HUD handler later, where it can just eat that up and play the animation and stuff as it should based on how much damage was dealt and the state of the actual object getting hit. So what that'll look like is a harvest payload, and it's going to be a class, and we're going to want some information here. So we want to know who hit it, we want to know what was hit, so the harvestable. We're going to want to know how much health it has after being hit. So we'll call that post damage health. We also want to know how much damage or how much health it had before it was hit. So we'll just call that pre-damage health. That's going to be a float as well. And we also want to know how much money we're gaining to handle our little pop-up. And that's our payload here that we're going to be sending off to our HUD manager to handle the animations and the pop-up and whatnot as well. So what we're going to do is have an event out in the Harvestable manager, which is going to be of this type. So then every time something's hit, it's going to broadcast that out to whoever cares about it. So we have a harvest event, and it's an event of type harvest payload, and we're going to need to initialize it as well. Load. Okay. The reason we're putting it out here is just so there's only one instance of it, and whoever cares about it will listen to it through this device, just to make sure there is only one harvest event being signaled and everybody's listening to that same event. It's not too useful out here. We're going to want it in here in our damage area, so we're going to want to pass it in here as well. So we can throw that as a variable, which we'll set when we initialize it as well. So we pass our harvest event. It's a type event of harvest payload, and we'll just copy equals initialize. There you go. And to get it in here, we'll just pass it in with the init function. So we'll go in harvest event, an event of type harvest payload, and then we'll just go set harvest event equal to in harvest event. There you go. So now when this runs, it'll set up all of its data. It'll also set up its harvest event. So now it has pretty much everything it needs to be kind of self-sustaining. Then now in our damage function, we have pretty much all the information that we'll need to meaningfully signal events when this thing gets hit. So we need to know how much damage it had, or how much health it had before it was hit. So we'll call that pre-damage health, and it's just going to be equal to the health. Before we subtract anything, before we do any math, it's just going to be how much health we have when the thing was hit, or like before we dealt any damage. And then we're just going to set the health to be, we're going to clamp this just to make sure it doesn't go below 0. And it's going to be health minus damage dealt. And the clamp is going to be a minimum of 0 and a maximum of our max health, which obviously this is kind of just a safety net. These will really never happen. Like obviously the health isn't going to go up when you deal damage unless you pass in a negative value. Going below 0 is not really an issue, but just for the sake of making sure our values are always normalized between 0 and 1 for the sake of our HUD. And then what we want to do is we want to signal our harvest event. So to signal that, we need to create a harvest payload, and it's going to cry because it needs a lot of data. So we want our player who hit it. We want to know the harvestable, which is, since this is in the harvestable, we can just call self. So it's going to pass the harvestable that was hit into this, since the harvestable itself is watching for the event. Then we want our post-damage health, which is going to be equal to our current health. And we want our pre-damage health, which is going to be equal to our pre-damage health as we set a second ago. And then the currency delta. Again, you'll probably want to change this. I'm just going to say we're gaining exactly how much damage was dealt as money, just for the sake of simplicity, but you can change that to be anything you'd want. If you have multipliers and whatnot, you could apply that here. Then what we want to do is we want to say if the health is 0, then we want to destroy our object, which we will just leave as a little blank for now. And if the health is not 0, we're going to want to try to play a on-hit animation. And we'll create these functions right now. So to start off, we'll do our hit animation. This is a lot of kind of nothing. Honestly, you can make this animation whatever you want. You can make it simpler, more advanced, whatever you feel like. So we're going to say try play hit animation because it's not guaranteed to play, because we're only going to play it if there's not already one playing. Because if you play an animation while an animation is playing, it can get a little messy, as I've experienced in the past. So, all right, so try play animation. It's going to return nothing. All it's going to do is set up the animation and queue it up. So first thing we want to do is get our animation controller, which is going to be our prop. Get animation controller. Great. And then we want to check to make sure that the state of this thing is not equal to, it's like an enum animation controller state or something .playing. We want to make sure that the animation, we just want to make sure the animation is not currently playing before we try and play it again. So great. We have the controller, and then we made sure that no animation is playing. So next we want to build up our animation. So our delta scale, so how much our scale is going to change is just going to be, let's get a random amount, I think, between 1 and 1.25. Get random? Okay, get random float maybe, that might be useful. So this is going to give us a random value between 1 and 1.25, so this is going to control how the object scales when you hit it. The scale value in itself is not too useful. We need to convert it to a vector to actually be used. So we can do that by just creating a vector 3 and setting the x equal to be our delta scale. And then we also want to set the y and the z values to be the same. Right, so we have our scale, and then we're going to want to invert that as well. So when it plays in reverse, it will go back to its original size. So this will be another vector 3. And let's just copy these 3 values so we don't have to type them all out. And what these are going to be is just 1.0 divided by that. So we can do that for all 3. And that will make it so the object returns to its original size at the end. All right, and we're just going to go with scaling. I think you can add rotation if you'd like. For the sake of simplicity, we're just going to go with a scalar. So the hit animation is going to be an array of keyframe deltas. And they need a bunch of information that you need to provide. Location, rotation, and time are some must-haves. So a delta location, which we don't really actually want. So we're just going to set this to be 0. Delta rotation, we don't really care for that, so we're just going to say identity rotation. And then time. We want this to happen pretty quickly. We're just going to say 0.1. And of course we want our actual scale here, so it's not required, but we want to use it just so something actually happens. And on the way forward, it's going to play regular scale, and then let's just copy all this, paste it, and then on the way back, we're just going to play the inverse scale. Now that you have all that, just go ahead and grab the anim controller, and then go .set animation, hit animation, and then set the questionable mode here, which is an optional. Then you want to set the mode to be a animation mode dot one shot, and then you're just going to go animation controller dot play, and that's the whole play animation function. So now you can just throw that into our part of the code here where we're going to play the animation when you hit something, if you can play it. All right, then we want to handle destruction of the object as well. So let's create another function for that. We're just going to call it destroy. And this is going to suspend, since it's going to hide the object over time and then wait the respawn time and then respawn the object. So the first thing we want to do is create our hidden position. So how we're going to hide it is pretty much just like sinking it through the floor. Maybe it's a little lazy, but that's an easy way to do it. You can also add any VFX or audio cues here as well as you'd like, but we're just going to stick with hiding it. So to do that, let's just grab the translation of our original position and just subtract some arbitrarily large z value, which we're just going to go with 1,000. So then what we're going to do is just grab our prop, and we're just going to move it to this position that we just created. Move it to there, and it needs a rotation as well. So we're just going to, the identity rotation, so it doesn't actually move, and it's going to move over 1 second. We're going to sleep our respawn time, so it's going to wait however long we set our respawn time to, and then it's going to move back to our original transform, which we can just pass in entirely. Great. And then we're also going to call a function called reset, which we'll create right now. This is just going to do any cleanup and just make sure, really all it's going to do is set the health back to be its max XP. But of course, any other reset-like functions you want to have, you can just throw them in there too. All right, that is about it for the actual harvestable as well as the container. Oh, actually, I guess we should call our destroy function. So we're going to want to spawn it since it is a asynchronous function. So what'll happen now is when you hit it, if the health is 0, which means it's damaged or it's gone, so it'll spawn this destroy function, which will hide it and then respawn it after a certain amount of time. And then if the health is not actually 0, it'll play this animation if there's not an animation already playing. Cool. So in our Harvestable manager itself, this is where we're going to want to actually set up our containers and our harvestables overall. So we need an editable here of our harvestable containers. And it's just going to be an array of harvestable container. And it's just going to be an empty array. Wonderful. And now to initialize these, we're just going to loop over them. So I'm going to say for harvestable container in harvestable containers, I want to sleep for a second here, just so per container, it'll do all of its setup, and then it'll go to the next container and do all of its setup. And it's not going to try and do them all in a single tick, because if you have too many, that'll probably be an issue, maybe. I don't know how many harvestables you're going to have, but just to make sure, we'll do it that way. And then we'll say for each harvestable in the harvestable container that we're currently looking at, what we're going to do is, what's this crap? Harvestables. For each harvestable, we're going to go ahead and initialize it. And it's going to want 2 parameters here. It's going to want the event as well as the container that we're currently looking at, or that it's inside of. So we can just pass that in, as well as the harvest event. Okay, wonderful. That's quite a bit of stuff, but yeah, so that'll link to the HUD manager, which will then control the health bar and such. Let's head over to the HUD manager and get that set up. So again, let's peel out all this boilerplate that this comes with and just block out our on begin for now. The first thing we'll do is just some generic setup. So we'll want some player spawners. Array of players, spawner device, and it's just going to be an array. So we can handle it when somebody spawns. We'll throw all this stuff on their screen and then start watching for these events that will modify these UI elements on their screen. Another thing we'll want is our harvestable manager. Harvestable manager. So we can actually watch for the harvesting events that will modify our HUD. Another thing we'll want is a player map. So this will just be a lookup table for what players are in the world. This is just so when somebody respawns, it doesn't try to re-add all this UI to their screen. So it'll just be a map of player to void, because we don't actually care what we're storing. We just want to know what players exist. All right, so the first thing we'll do is sub to our spawn event. So we can just go ahead and copy this player spawners. So for each player spawner in player spawners, we will do player spawner dot spawned event subscribe, and then we'll call it on spawn function, which we'll create right now. It's just a function that takes in nothing, takes in an agent actually, and returns nothing. And all it's going to do is cast that agent to be a player. And then we want to say if they're not in the player map, we're going to want to set them to be in the player map, and then we're going to handle HUD, which we will create in a second. Another thing we'll want to do is watch for leavers. Since this function is going to be adding players to the map every time somebody new joins, that can get kind of bloated and just waste storage, which is it's not a lot of storage, but like if you have a lot of people churning through your map, it'll add up and it'll start to cause some issues. So we also want to clean it up when players leave. So on leave, and it'll take in a player and it will return nothing. And all it's going to do is set our player map equal to this player map dot remove key of the player. So remove key is just a utility function that I'm just going to paste in here. Remove key. All it does is goes through the map, compares the keys, and only sets the ones that are not the one you're trying to remove. Anyway, that's not too important. So once we have our player in our player map, that means it'll only spawn this thing once, and that'll just handle them. So let's create this handle HUD function. Handle HUD. It's going to take in a player, and it's going to suspend. So that means it's going to run over time and handle the player's HUD. So the first thing we'll need is, of course, the player's UI. So we can do that by getting player UI of that player. And we're going to need our two widgets, and we're going to throw them on the screen. So let's start with the Healthbar. Healthbar widget is going to be our widget, which we threw in a folder called widgets. I think it was called w_healthbar. Yep, perfect. And we're just going to add that right to this player screen. So we can do that by just player add widget and then the Healthbar widget. Unfortunately, this Healthbar doesn't have the same benefit as the Popup, where it's invisible to start, so we're going to have to actually hide it to make sure it's not just on the screen when the player joins, because that wouldn't really make too much sense. So we can go set visibility, delete this first part, and then just widget visibility dot hidden. So now it'll add it to the screen, it'll hide it, and we'll show it again later when they actually hit something. Another little thing is setting our Healthbar widget's animation speed. This is something we're just going to want to set once. I think 0.25 is good, and the reason we set this here is just so you can change it later if you want. If you want the delta to move quicker or slower, it's really whatever you feel like. But that's pretty much all that's set up for the Healthbar. Sort of. We'll get into actually handling the events later. We'll also want our Popup widget, which I believe is also in the same folder and named something quite intuitive like Popup. And we're also going to add that to the player screen, so we can just copy the code that did that earlier and then just switch out the widget to be Popup widget. Wonderful. All right, so all this UI is now on the player's screen and is all invisible, which is, not too useful. So we actually want to show it and play these animations according to when these events are coming in. And yeah, so to start, we'll want to have a race. So the reason we want to race is to make sure that this gets canceled when the player that we're watching for leaves the game. So we can do that by just doing get player space. We want play space. Yeah, player space dot player removed event await. That's parentheses there as well. And we'll say if the leaver, so if the player who left is equal to the player we're watching for, then just break, cancel this race. This will also need to be wrapped in a loop, just so that every time somebody leaves, it's going to check, say, who left? Is it the person I'm watching for? If it is, kill this handler. And then the other thing we want to watch for is our harvest event. So we want to actually make this a variable, which we'll see later why, just for the sake of simplicity. So we'll go harvest payload is equal to the harvestable manager dot harvest event dot await. Why is this complaining? Oh, it needs a type. Harvest payload. That's why. I think it's complaining because it's a variable or something, but who cares? We're just gonna throw a sleep in there just so it stops crying for now. and we'll take it out later. So the first thing we want to do is get our payload, and we want to check that the person who hit something, which is the player beginning passed in our payload, and make sure that's the player we're watching for. If it is, then we can proceed and do something meaningful. So the first thing that is meaningful is, of course, hiding or revealing our health bar. So we can do that by just doing set visibility, widget visibility, dot visible. So that'll show the health bar on the player's screen as it was hidden before. Another thing we want to do is set up a variable to track our running total that we have for our currency that we're gaining. So we'll do that just by creating a variable called currency running total. It's going to be a float, and it's going to start out just being equal to the harvest payload dot currency delta. Right. So the amount that starts at is how much was immediately passed into it from the event that we just caught. And then after we have this event, we're going to want to loop, and we're going to want to look for more of this event, because if you hit consecutive times, it's easier to just handle them kind of back to back like that. So let's just sleep this out for now, just so it stops complaining. We're going to write some quick utility functions for setting up all the fields that are necessary on our widgets. So to do that, let's create a function. I think it's called like an infix operator function or something. It doesn't really matter what the name is, but so it's going to have a widget here, which we're just going to call W, and it's going to be a type widget.w underscore healthbar, and it's going to be called .load harvest payload, and it's going to take in a harvest payload. Okay, not quite like that. Harvest underscore payload, like the type, and it's not going to return anything, and just block it out for now. So what this is going to do, every time this event gets caught, instead of just like having all that code sitting in here, maybe it'll be a little messy, hard to read, we're going to just export it into here. So what this is going to do is it's just going to set all the fields, as well as play the animation, set any flags that are necessary, because it's a little messy and I would rather not have it in our logic handler kind of portion here. So the first thing we want is our damage progress. So we want to know what the current kind of fill level of the progress bar is. So we can do that by just grabbing the harvest payload, and then grabbing our post damage health, and then divide that by the harvest payload. Okay, this is going to get pretty long and messy, I apologize, but we're just going to go with it. So we're going to create a intermediate variable just to make this a little easier. So we're going to call this one max health, and it's just going to be our harvest payload dot harvestable dot max health, just so we don't have to write that whole thing out when we want to reference it. I'm sure it's only referenced once, but it is a hell of a lot neater, so let's do that. So we have our damage progress, and then we also want our pre-damage progress. That is also necessary. So we can do that by just going into our harvest payload. Let's just copy this and call pre instead of post, pre-damage health. And we're going to want to also divide that by our max health. Okay, maybe that intermediate was a little better than I anticipated, but whatever. So let's just set up all of these bindings now. So set w dot, which w in this case is our health bar widget. And we're going to set our animation start time. Start time equal to 1.0 minus the pre-damage progress. So the reason this is 1.0 is because our animation goes from full to empty. So we need to invert it to actually play in the right direction. But anyway, so we're also going to want to set the end time, anim end time, which is just going to be equal to 1.0 minus the damage progress. Maybe not ent, maybe end. That might be a better way to put it. Then we also want to set up our damage progress. So we're just going to pass in our damage progress. We'll also want to set our title. You know, it's kind of unfortunate that we set this every single time the thing gets hit, but it handles the case where you start hitting one thing and then you start hitting another thing, and if they have different names, it'll update properly. And it'll also play the animations and such as intended. So for this, we're going to need another utility function. So we're just going to copy that in again. We're going to throw that above up here. It's a toMessage function. And we're also going to want to import some other utility functions. This one just converts floats into a formatted text string with a suffix. I paste it in here. It's kind of huge. Just paste that as well. Honestly, I don't think it's worth going through. But anyway, So the title is going to be just toMessage, and it's just going to be the harvest payload dot harvestable dot title, and that'll just set the title so nicely. And one quick thing we're going to do as well is we're going to convert our progresses into strings before we throw them in here, just because this is going to be like a super long piece of text to write in. So we'll say our current health is going to be equal to a float to string, which is that formatter string I just mentioned. And we're going to throw in our harvest payload dot post damage health. So this is how much health the actual health bar has, or the harvestable has. And we'll say max health as well. Max health strings, so they are differentiable. And it'll be pretty much the exact same thing. So we're just going to copy it, paste it, and it's just going to be dot. We'll just pass in the max health that we set a second ago. Right, and then what we're going to do is set our w.title, not title, the damage progress message to message of our current health, plus a string of this like slash, and then plus the max health string. And that'll create our text, which we saw earlier, which was the like 123/456 kind of actual numerical progress of the health bar. And then finally, we're going to set our animation. Play damage, so w.play damage anim equal to 1.0. And that is it for that function. So we're also going to set up the utility function for our pop-up. So again, w is what we're going to name it, and it's in the folder widgets. It's called the w_popup. That's the type. And again, we're just going to call it load harvest payload, and it's going to take in a harvest payload, which is of type harvest_payload. And it is going to return nothing, as the other one did as well. And all we're going to really do here is set our delta, since the accumulator is handled in the actual logic part, just because that's where it's stored, and I don't want to pass so much data around. We don't have to. So we can just set the w.currency delta equal to toMessage, toMessage, please, thank you. toMessage of a plus icon, plus character, plus a float to string of our harvest payload dot currency delta. Set w.play collection animation as well. So we want to play our animation after setting up the fields that are necessary. These will save us from having to write all this kind of setup jargon in our handler. That'll just make things a little tidier, and we can actually see what's happening. So anyway, back up here. So right into our loop, the first thing we want to handle is our pop-up stuff. So all we want to do is set our pop-up widget dot currency running total, which is our verse binding for our running total, to be a message of, just like before, the plus sign plus a float to string of our currency running total. Then in our, we can use this infix operator we just did, so we can do that dot set. It's a load harvest payload of our harvest payload. There you go. The whole pop-up is pretty much done now, honestly. It'll, every time you hit something now, this will set the running total properly, and it'll set the data properly as well. The next thing you want to do is deal with the health bar stuff. So health bar widget dot load harvest payload, and pass in the harvest payload. So we handled pretty much everything for the widget, or the health bar, in that kind of infix utility function we made, so we don't actually have to worry about that one too much. And then another thing we'll have to do, sleep for just like 1/10 of a second. This is the value I came to when I was testing it. I honestly don't know why. I think it's just something to do with this lovely language in the system. But anyway, we want to reset our flags, just so they are ready to go for the next iteration. So play damage anim, just reset it back to 0. And we want to also set the animation, cancel animation, animation flag to that 0 as well. Set pop-up widget as well. We want to set this thing's function animation. I think this is probably just anim. Anyway, so reset all those flags so that they're ready to go for the next animation. So the next thing we want to do is handle if they hit again or not, right? So how we're going to do that is just having another race. So we're going to call it harvested another, and it's going to be a race of 2 blocks. So the first one is going to be just sleeping our animation duration, which is 2.0 seconds in this case, and then we're going to return false. So that means if this one wins the race, that'll mean 2 seconds have passed without them hitting anything. So we're going to say harvested another is equal to false, and we'll check for that afterwards when we decide what to do. And then we'll need a second block, which is going to be a loop, and it's going to set our harvest payload that we have above equal to this entire thing, actually. So we're just going to copy that and paste it up here. So what this is going to do is going to catch the next one, and it's going to again check if this payload dot player is equal to the player we're watching. If it is, then do, well, whatever. And the whatever that we're going to be doing is handling the stopping of our animation, as well as updating our running total, and then telling our system that we have hit another thing. So the first thing we'll do is set our Healthbar widget dot cancel animation equal to 1.0, and we're gonna also want to do that for our Popup widget. So cancel both of those. What? Cancel anim. I don't really know why I named those different things, but anyway, cancel anim on that one, and then we're gonna sleep for a tick. Copy both of these, paste them. Okay, you can just do Control L to select the full line, Control Shift arrow key down, and you can select the bottom line below that. Copy that. Go over here, new line. You can do Shift Tab to move things back if you like. Short key, hotkeys, whatever. Anyway, set those to 0. Set those flags back to 0 so then they can be used again later. Sleep another tick, just to make sure everything is being set properly in the widget blueprints. And then we're going to set our currency running total plus equal to the new payload that we just received, currency delta. Wonderful. And then we're going to break this loop, and this is going to then return true. So what's happening here? Of course, the 2 seconds thing as mentioned before, and then this loop. So every time this loop runs, it's going to wait for somebody to hit something, and that could be anybody. So then we're going to check who hit this, and if the person who hit it is the person we're watching for, then we're going to cancel the animations that are currently playing, and it's going to set this to true, which we'll do something with in a minute, which is going to decide if this whole loop replays or not with these new values. And we can do that right now. So we're going to say if not harvest another, then break. Okay, harvested another, okay, whatever. So what it's saying is if we didn't harvest another one, then stop this loop and head back up here and wait for the initial harvest to happen again. And if it didn't happen, then we're going to want to go Healthbar widget dot set visibility, and we're going to want to rehide our Healthbar. Since the pop-up will hide itself using the animation and its default settings, we don't have to worry about that one, but the Healthbar is a little less nice to work with, so we actually have to manually set that. And I think that's actually everything. Not quite. We want to set this here. So spawn our handle hide function for this player. Now that should be everything. And now we can head over into UEFN and do some setup there. All right, back in UEFN, the first thing we're going to do is go compile our verse code, and then open up our drawer, go to our root, and you should see a couple of devices have appeared. So let's throw them down in any order, really. Let's start with our HUD manager, then throw our Harvestable manager, and let's throw our container down. So you're actually going to be using multiple containers if you actually end up using this system, or if you modify it in any way, you should just know that you'll have multiple of these containers, which we'll see in a minute how to use them. So we can go to the HUD manager, add in our spawners, go to our Harvestable manager, add in our Harvestable manager, then go to our Harvestable manager, add one element to our Harvestable container array, and you can just use the eyedropper to select that. All right, then in our container, this is where we actually define our harvestables. So let's give them a name. Let's say LVL1, level 1 rock. Sure, sounds cool. Let's give it 15 health, and it'll respawn over the course of 5 seconds. And let's add some elements to this array. We'll add 3, and we're gonna need to place these down. So to make one, just go into Fortnite. Let's go props, look up rock. Let's find a nice looking rock. This one looks pretty cool. And we're just going to duplicate that 3 times. Actually, let's set up the prop manipulator with it before we duplicate it, just so we can do it all at once. Go devices, look up prop, find the manipulator, just drag it so it's touching the rock. And there's not really that many settings to change on this, but there is an important one you'll want to set, which is modifying the prop health and making it invulnerable so that the player can't actually destroy it, and the code will handle the quote-unquote destruction of the object, which is actually just sinking it beneath the floor and then raising it up again when its respawn time is up. But anyway, so what you can do is you can actually attach these to one another just to make it easier to move them. So if you go to your prop manipulator, right click it, go attach to, and then find your prop, your rock prop. So now if you move your rock, the manipulator will move with it. And then you can just shift click on both the rock and the manipulator and duplicate them by holding Alt and dragging out using your gizmo. And there we go. So we got 3 of these. Unfortunately, these do not get named very well, so we're just going to call this. So unfortunately, these don't get named too well, so we're just going to have 2 and name it rock 1. I should have done this beforehand, so then it would have done with the copy, but whatever. Rock 3, 1, 2, 3. And then in your container, you're going to go prop, select your rock 1, select your prop manipulator 1, just go down the list. Make sure you set these in the pairs that they appear. So we've got 1, 2, 3. And what we're going to do, we're going to set up a second one just so you can see how this kind of works in general. So drag out a second container. I would advise against duplicating these devices just because references tend to get very, very broken when you do that. So we'll call this one level 2 rock, and it's going to have 5 million health or something. I don't know. Respawn in 5 seconds. We're never actually going to break it, so you won't even see it, but we'll just add one of those. So we can just duplicate one of these rocks out, and to see the difference, let's just scale this up so you can see what's happening. And just select that one, 4 and 4. So this one will be our unbreakable super rock. And we'll also have to add that container in here, which you should probably rename these rock level 1 dash rock level 2, just so you can differentiate them. Not that it's all that important. Slide over these, save, compile one more time just to make sure, and then let's load up a session, see how it looks. All right, session's loaded. Let's go ahead and start game. All right, so let's see what we're working with. Okay, looking good. So as you can see, as you go between these, it will do that. And then when we go to hit a rock that's like obviously unbreakable, it'll switch the title and such as we'd expect. All right, thank you so much for watching. Of course, if you have any questions, let me know. The system is not really that complete. It is kind of just a starting point for anybody who was wondering how these kind of maps like Miner Tycoon or Lumber Tycoon are making these kind of systems. So of course, you'll need to extend these with your own code to handle, you know, stuff like damage numbers, storing these resources, and actually doing things with them. Let me know what kind of stuff you guys want to see next, and yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one.